just to quickly introduce myself, I'm sure there was a blurb somewhere, but I head up the innovation group at J. Walter Thompson, which is JWT's in-house think tank for the future. We're part research unit, part consultancy, and part incubator. A unique thing about the way we approach trend forecasting and futurism is that we do look at the creative space and consumer insight and data and all that, so we consider ourselves very multidisciplinary. Anyway, so the talk today, I was asked to talk about serendipity and in particular my journey and how I got to here. And when I look back on my career, a lot of it has actually been quite serendipitous, but then equally, when I look back at how it related to trends and change, I curiously had this sort of instinct for how the market was changing and how consumers were changing and how work was changing. So, for example, I started off in journalism and after a few years slightly realised it was dying and therefore thought, right, futurism. And then from futurism moved into innovation. So the connection between futurism is kind of execution, right? So connecting the insight, knowing what's happening in the future to creating new products, creating new strategies. So weirdly, also each part of that experience and each stage has sort of informed the next one. Again, in the type of journalism that I did, weirdly, I sort of moved with market forces. From fashion, I started off as a fashion journalist, and then promptly, as retail kind of started to tail off, but luxury boomed, I started writing about the luxury market. This was when all the luxury brands were having a massive boom in the brick markets, and so that became a specialism. And then right through to now in my role, I kind of look at everything. And again, that sits with kind of how cultural forces are working. When you think about it, fashion is less of a cultural influencer now. In fact, you've seen teenagers not differentiate between brands when it comes to clothing or beauty, but when it comes to technology, they're really influenced by it. So weirdly and serendipitously, but kind of having an instinct for how changes around the world, my career has kind of moved with change. And what that's really, the combination of my personal experience and what my job is just this real understanding for the need to look at change and understand what is driving change as a means to try and navigate the future and succeed in the future. As I said, this path has kind of set me up for each stage. So starting out in journalism itself may be dying, but sorry, I shouldn't be so dramatic, but maybe it is, or it's just becoming Facebook. Facebook is becoming the fourth estate. But that understanding of language has really set me up for my long-term career in a really important way. So I might not be writing stories for newspapers anymore, but helping a brand create a tone of voice and understanding the nuance in defining a sort of a persona for brands has become really important, especially when you think about the rise of ad blocking now and the renaissance happening in branded content. Every brand is trying to sound human, affect an editorial voice, and so having an understanding of how to develop that for a brand has actually been really important, so it was worth it, all those years in the newsroom. When I was at the Future Laboratory, which is a London-based forecasting consultancy, I learned futurism. I learned how to predict trends, and that isn't, in case anyone thinks, reading your horoscopes every morning, although I do. I read 3 and choose which one is best. You'll win the lottery. But I realised that actually trend forecasting in the future and futurism is not about inventing something new. It's not about plucking something from thin air. This is a famous quote from a futurist and science fiction writer, William Gibson, that a lot of futurists look at. The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So predicting the future is actually about looking at what is happening now, but in latent form, like looking for change and signs of change that will be impactful. And the way that you do that is by looking at things that, when you look at the contextual drivers of them, if those things are only going to get bigger and are connected to change you're seeing in consumers. I'm one of those horrible marketing people that calls people consumers. But in looking at people's circumstances, you can kind of look at clusters and trends and differentiate between what is a fad and what will become part of a bigger movement. So signs of impactful change is what this philosophy is about. The Future Lab was really interesting as well because I learned about the importance of trends not being one silo. So, you know, when you look at something like a WGSN, or you look at Euromonitor, or you look at data, it's easy to think that trends happen in isolation, and actually they happen collectively and on a macro form. And so we, in my job now and ever since actually this point, we look at trends in a very, very multifaceted way. We connect consumer trends to what is happening in visual culture and design culture. And we examine what cool might look like to teenagers, but why? So we have a filter on visual culture and really connect any zeitgeist shift to things we're seeing in the creative space. And in fact, we examine the creative space at the same time as looking at data and academics, because creative people actually have an instinct for trends as well, and often are at the forefront of particularly subcultural trends. Oh, my colleagues put a GIF in. Wonderful. Excellent. School of Doodle, I'd really recommend actually. It's a teenage creative platform. It's really cool. But you also get an instinct for a future by having a wide network of diverse interests, so not looking in one source. So I've really understood the need to have a big network of people from multiple disciplines, from founders of startups to academics to industry experts. So, I mean, these are just a few of the people that we consult for all our forecasting now. And attending events, so South by Southwest, people will joke that it's jumped the shark, and in many ways it has. But events like South by Southwest, CES, The Next Web, by bringing together lots of creative minds and intellectual minds in one space, it's really weird. You sort of see that trends bubble and collective ideas bubble to the surface, and it can be a really interesting way to affirm predictions that you're having or observations that you're having. The other interesting thing is that I've learned along the way is to examine success or examine fast-growing brands. So to look at brands and not understand just that they're successful, but why they're successful. So it was interesting when Dollar Shave Club first launched, the direct-to-consumer shaving brand. Does everyone know that brand? Yeah. Gillette's first instinct was to just launch a subscription service, but it kind of didn't understand why Dollar Shave Club was successful. Like, it was successful, I mean, in fact, it was very cheap to set up. Unilever could have built any one of these CPG brands could have built a Dollar Shave Club. It was using wholesale razors from Germany, a website, a platform, and it just had a neat concept with a viral video that the comedian who founded it, launched online. He didn't buy any advertising. And what was neat about it was that it just had this fantastic tone of voice. It was kind of like an anti-brand brand, right? It was saying, don't buy Gillette blades or don't buy branded razor blades. They're just paying for the celebrities to front it. We're getting the same blades that are as good a quality as those, but actually we're charging you half the price or much, much less the price. And Gillette just thought it was all about subscription. So it's understanding why things have been successful and why they're growing so fast that is really important. More recently at J. Walter Thompson, more and more we've started looking in more granular detail at people. So actually asking people why they like something, because that also can help you understand change and understand why it's happening. So, and doing that in a very multifaceted way. So we do interviews with consumers when we're examining any cohort, like teenagers. We've been doing a lot of work on this as our teen panel. So we interview them in depth for a couple of hours, but we also send a photographer to their home to photograph their home environment, because actually a lot of the choices and a lot of aspects of your character are kind of unconscious, right? You know, I, in some unconscious way, curate my disgustingly messy bathroom cabinet. I have magazines strewn everywhere. There's lots of decisions that you make in your life and the way you curate your interiors that say everything about you as a person that you might not be necessarily aware of. And also data has become really an important thing, especially for major brands. And that's not just surveys, sort of asking surveys. I mean, we commission original surveys for everything that we do now, but also using data analytics. So that's another form of unconscious behaviour that people are doing online, you know, social listening. So you listen to trends and you listen to keywords, you listen to themes that are emerging and bubbling up on social media as a means to understand the innovation group globally is quite how global trends are now. And it sounds like a dumb thing to say, but that is due to the internet. But you really are seeing the path of trends, like trends that would have taken years to reach the mass market, really, and that path is happening much, much faster. Things that might have been subcultural and remained on the fringes of society are now becoming mass market trends really quick. And the trend path is non-linear. So again, it used to be that actually Northern European cities, America, the UK, maybe Japan, trends started there and then they filtered out. And now they're coming from everywhere. So you can have a trend in South Korea reach a global stage, and you saw that with beauty, reach a global stage very quickly. But you're also seeing a kind of homogenization as well of trends, which is really interesting. The fact that athleisure, for example, is now a global trend. So you have Nike opening massive flagships in Shanghai. Hipster culture is now completely global. I was in sorry, hair on my face. I was in Cairo the other week, and there were cafes in there that just would not look out of place in Shoreditch or in Williamsburg. That kind of hipsterism, which ironically was all about being unique and special, has actually become everything. It's even when you look in Urban Outfitters, I think it's sort of defined by being individual, but kind of has become everything to everybody. But you are seeing that globalization of trends. So even Netflix, for example, is launching content on a global stage. And when you look at teenagers as well, teenagers aged 12 to 19, they're actually perhaps the most global generation to date, because they've not only been raised at a time of ubiquitous technology, but mature social media. So you're seeing for the first time a kind of a global generation with a global view on things and globally connected to trends. But understanding trends and changes is arguably becoming more important than ever, because the future is happening much faster than ever. So brands used to plan for like 10 years in the future, and then that would be fine, and they would have their long-term plan and they would have their 3 to 5 year plan. But actually stuff that they're planning for in 5 years' time is happening in 2, and halving again and again and again. And so they're really having to think more broadly into the future, because that is happening much faster. And the consequences of not adapting to change are really real and also happening really quickly. So the joke is that Polaroid or any one of those photography companies could have been Instagram. They could have looked at change. They could have looked at the fact that millennials had this weird nostalgia for filters and sharing experiences online and was 100% digital. And they could have been Instagram had they adapted to and understood change, but they didn't. Gillette could have been, or launched a version of Dollar Shave Club. Instead, Unilever ended up buying it for $1 billion. Amazon is one that is, I have a whole deck for the brands that I'm talking to at the moment about why they should be scared of Amazon. It's the A word. So one interesting statistic, in the US, 89% of millennials look at Amazon for any product of any category online before they look at any other website. So what do you do if you're Walmart or Macy's? And the thing is, it's becoming a multi-pronged, virtuous ecosystem of data, shopping, and everything in between. Launching its own shipping systems with Amazon Echo, is actually moving into social media sharing with Amazon Look. You can now take photos of yourself and share them, and it's got AI built in and all those scary dystopian things. But also, it's having worked on dash buttons where you can replenish all items that you want, it's now launching private label goods. So if you have these major CPG brands who use the regular retail network to sell toothpaste, to sell tampons, Amazon's creating its own virtual ecosystem, and it has all the data on how often people want stuff, how much, and what they like. And it's developing quite nice brands too, like nicely executed brands. So I'm telling every single brand that we work with to worry about this. Amazon, Google is doing the same thing, and not only that, is introducing virtual systems with payments. And another thing that brands are really not thinking about is how to sell when you're actually not interacting with buttons or a screen, when you're actually talking to something. What does your brand tone of voice sound like if you're a sentient, verbal person? Does Uniqlo have a Japanese accent? What does she or he say? When you think about women's magazines, we recently did a study on the future of women everywhere. But then we looked at women's magazines, and not only are their sales declining, but when we compared every single aspect of what is in a traditional women's magazine, a women's interest magazine, everything about them is out of sync with how women are changing and where they're headed, from notions of gender, from notions of career, from notions of relationship. You might have noticed in Cosmopolitan and Glamour, they're incredibly, for one, heteronormative. We got a big stack and looked at them when we just finished the study, and we were like, wait, there are no lesbians in Cosmopolitan. And, again, everything is through the lens of achieving marriage and achieving having a boyfriend, which is kind of old-fashioned when you think about it. And so women's magazines arguably are not adapting or understanding change. But you are seeing brands making some attempts to change, and so with a number of different approaches, which I'll just sort of talk you through, which are really interesting in this age of constant disruption. Some of them are being really experimental, so they're using one-off PR stunts to kind of experiment with their image as a way to understand younger people. So this is actually a Kotex pop-up period store. They were trying to tap into new wave feminism and again get some PR by having a concept store for all the stuff you might want, including chocolate and movies when you've got your period. But they've made it pink, which I just thought was a bit disappointing. Boutique commercials, so people, brands even like Starbucks, have introduced new, groovier sub-brands that they're rolling out that feel slightly more premium, slightly more artisanal, slightly more trend-aware, and they're launching those in key cities. Blue Sky, this is a big Silicon Valley thing. Write a white paper and it will come. So Elon Musk wrote about Hyperloop as this vision for the future of transport, and Wobatol and VCs are throwing money at his friend who actually took it over to build this train that will supposedly bend space and time. Uber has recently been writing white papers on the future of urban transport, where we will be flying around in on-demand cars. Investing in labs to actually build the future. So it's created a lab exploring the future of play, but also how toys will evolve in that, and increasing wrapping in sustainability into that as well, to create sustainable toys that will also sit with how we think about play. But a lot of the Silicon Valley guys, they've got this whole thing, we are future-proof, we crack the code we break ourselves all the time, we disrupt ourselves all the time, and therefore we're never going to die. I think they're too big to die at this point, and they're just going to end up buying companies that might threaten them. But they are also turning to philosophers to understand the future. So Yuval recently wrote a book about, the brief history of humankind, which you might have seen, but also the brief history of tomorrow. But another one that Jeff Bezos looks at all the time is Nassim Taleb, Black Swan. And the argument of Black Swan is that actually all history is retrofitted, and that it was actually completely serendipitous. And so we're just applying a false logic to something that was always a big surprise. Because we're all trying to sleep better, so it's just buying companies to innovate. Labs and incubators have become this thing. Everyone from L'Oreal to Target has set up a lab in Silicon Valley, as if by osmosis they might sort of like breathe in the innovation. This is the Target lab. Again, understanding that sustainability and sustainable resources is going to be a big pressure, and consumption of energy is going to be pressure on your business, but it's also becoming a real priority to people. And brands are innovating in sustainability as a major PR platform, but doing so in quite creative ways as well. This is actually Adidas with Parley for the Oceans, which is a creative collective that raises awareness of sustainability, but they've also invented an entirely new form of fabric that is more sustainable and made out of ocean plastic. You have this idea of pivoting as well. So Snapchat is one of those that sort of moved from being a social network into a payments company, which kind of failed. There is actually a whole list of Google failures on Wikipedia, which I welcome you to check out. But you have companies really rethinking what they are, even Pepsi, and mindful of perhaps the fact that we're not buying sugary drinks or see them as something that we should really give our kids. It's now trying to become an experience brand. It's launched a new thing in the meatpacking district, which is like a concert hall. Ages to understand millennials. They really sort of dragged their feet, and now, still 10 years on, I'm giving presentations on millennials, even though some of them are middle-aged now, including me. So Generation Z, I've been in New York too long, Generation Z, 12 to 19-year-olds, centennials, lots of brands now looking to this group to get a better understanding of them for when they reach maturity because they have a completely different headspace. They interact with brands differently, and these are your future consumers. Glossier is already doing that in quite an interesting way. Glossier is a beauty brand that actually crowdsources most of its product concepts. So everything is defined by social listening, by listening to feedback from people. Now, in terms of serendipity, career, and the future, which is kind of hopefully hung together as a theme. I spent the last year and a half, I thought, for shits and giggles around my job, I'd write a book, which has also been curiously helped me, I think, look toward the next stage of my career and the next stage of businesses as well that I work with. For one, encountering publishing has been an interesting one. Like journalism, it's an industry in decline, and I can quite see why, having worked within it for a year and a half. The subject of my book is actually about how Silicon Valley, which is why I talked a lot about them, are actually going to be moving into health, education, and public transport, and what that could look like, whether that's a good thing or not. And they've already swallowed several industries, and applying that same platform-led, consumer-led, counterintuitive business model to new sectors, and what that could mean. So that subject matter has also made me look at the brands that I consult in a new light, like how quickly an entire industry can be completely disrupted. And also when I'm working with clients, which a lot of ours are health, kind of saying, look at what they've done to the music industry. Silicon Valley's next emphasis now, and huge amounts of investment, is going into fintech and health, so watch out. Working on something that is really challenging and hard is actually really good for future-proofing yourself. I think putting yourself out of your comfort zone and taking something quite intense is actually really good to do regularly. And outside your maybe your traditional skill set, having been a journalist I can write, but writing something that is 90,000 words is altogether different. I started thinking about like future careers and what I need to think about the future in that sense. At Google's creative agency, you can't just submit a resume anymore. You can't even submit a PDF. You have to code your resume. So coding is becoming the basic language that we all need to know, and it will ultimately become automated, but it is a language that we're all going to need to understand, among other skills. And what I've increasingly understood is that in order to succeed going forward is you have to be adaptable, learn hard things, and challenge yourself, but also understand change. So that's kind of it. Have I done the time? Have I done it in the time? Perfect time? I don't know if anyone...
Doing every day?
Oh, so the think tank at J. Walter Thompson, I'm based in New York, and my role is to kind of be the voice of the outside in the future to our brands that we work with in JWT, which is a big global advertising company. But we also work directly with brands, researching not only cultural change, but consumer change. So we look at groups of consumers from generation of cohorts like 12 to 19-year-olds, but also markets like the Middle Eastern female Muslim consumer, which is also showing, that group is showing a lot of change and has a lot of implications to brands. And then we look at like sector innovation as well, like the future of retail, future of beauty, future of travel, all through the lens of change we're seeing among consumers anyway, so that things that we see as part of a bigger movement. And then we work with brands to create strategies and even incubate products based on that. So we've been working with a lot of consumer packaged goods companies to develop actual brand concepts based on the future, in particular for Gen Z, which has been really cool. But taking into account not only consumer insight, but also visual trends and visual language. We've been doing a whole deep dive into what visual culture looks like to Gen Z, why it's cool, what it looks like, and how brands should execute against that. Because teenagers, well, in general, millennials kind of downwards have a really sophisticated understanding of visual culture and design culture and expect brands to be really well executed. And when you look at the traditional brand landscape, I think a lot of brands still don't really get that, or the need for a radical redesign. So that's like kind of my day-to-day. But also coming around to conferences like this. So, yeah.
What does the future look like as you age? Because it seems like even though you're talking about the future, like people are going to be old too. So it just seems like still the concentration's on youth and young. So like, should I like bow out at some point?
Yes, definitely, bow out. It's all over. It's all over. In fact, we've actually been doing a lot of studies on 50-plus consumers, and we're doing what we're calling it mid-adulthood, the future of adulthood this summer, which is interesting, but how that is really kind of blurring. Like millennials now, you still think about these stereotypical Hannah Horvath girls view of millennials, and actually a lot of them now have mortgages and families, and it's kind of in flux. But we've been looking at 50-plus consumers as well, about this, not only the fact that they have way more money than millennials, and so we shouldn't ignore them. Like, on a macro level, they have way more money. Anti-aging is not really a selling point to skincare anymore, so we're seeing big change happening for the skincare industry. And they want to be represented in a real and celebratory way. Apart from anything else, we're seeing the rise in like hair care brands that celebrate white hair and help you perfect white and grey hair, rather than dyeing your hair brown with this sort of promise of youth. It's kind of a lot of change going on that front too. But a lot of brands are adopting like an ageless mentality. Yeah.
You touched on it briefly. I'm interested to hear a little bit about how these big corporate companies that are struggling with transforming themselves can attract talents, because there is a gap in terms of vision. And how do you see that evolving?
That's a really good question. No, it's a massive challenge, because apart from anything else... so I was asked how big brands are attracting talent, because they're in a moment of seismic change that is really impacting their business, but it's making it really hard for them to attract interesting and new and talented people, and the talented people that they need to actually future-proof themselves, some would say. I don't know if anyone has really cracked it. I mean, we know that on a sort of on a sort of headspace level, millennials are motivated by some sort of social good, some sort of cause or meaning to what they do. Sometimes that can be a bit superficial, but they like to wear Tom's shoes and feel good about themselves, and it's a kind of aspirational form of benevolence. They are entrepreneurial, so they want some kind of shared equity in stuff, and they want to be rewarded individually for when they do over-deliver. And a lot of and they also want to work for companies, we found overwhelmingly, that have a reputation for innovation. And so a lot of brands are trying to affect that, and also even in their environments, to sort of make them have the bean bags, have the hammocks and the sleeping pods. But I think it's going to be an ongoing challenge for them to attract them, not least because they don't have the money that tech companies have.
Relate innovation, and you say about the future trends and maybe current trends when it comes to travel through cities, navigating through places people would like to go.
So emerging trends in where people would like to go.
Let's say my parents would buy a book and read about a city or country and then go and explore it by the book. What's happening these days? And what's going to happen in the future? Right,
so yeah, that's really changing, and that's a lot to do with social media. So food, travel and beauty, you're seeing the trend path of when something is like unique and new and small and independent, reaching critical mass, happening really, really quickly. And so, especially as experience culture has become a form of social currency. So we found in our data people are much more likely to share a picture of an amazing experience or access to something interesting or new, or a destination that no one's been to, than like a product or a thing anymore. But that's made their understanding of travel and new experiences much more sophisticated. So they're actually more prepared to go to more challenging areas, more intrepid areas, but the intrepid area changes every 2 seconds. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that the rise of solo travel, like more and more people travelling on their own, including women and professional women, travelling and extending their business trips for travel. We're seeing through Expedia, I think, just published some data about that, which is creating a whole new raft of services and social media platforms for it's redefining how you would explore a city, really. So that's 2 ways that it's changing.
You said earlier about magazines like Cosmopolitan or Elle, like they no longer they're no longer really speaking to kind of the audience. What have you found the balance between, on the one hand, trying to like almost like serve everyone, so almost being a bit everything to everyone and kind of diluting your message, as opposed to, hey, we've only got this niche, but really double down on that, and rather than alienating your sort of your market who you've already got. So I know if they, for example, try to dilute what they're about and then apply to more people, then maybe what's the balance between the existing customers who maybe just like whatever, I don't know, I'm not really sure.
I think it has become really fragmented though, because, and that is again because of the internet. Like you can kind of read whatever, wherever, whenever. Like, so if I want to read travel, I read Condé Nast Traveler. If I want to read about business, I go to the FT. If I want to read about beauty, I'll look on Sephora's branded content. It's like, do you know what I mean? Like this concept of a magazine that serves a whole woman and women's interests. I mean, even the idea of having a women's interest magazine is kind of weird when you think about the way that people consume and live now. It's kind of interchangeable, like the things that you shop for. So I agree. I think being all things to all, it's almost like an impossible task now, because you can't really define what women's interests are. They're as unlimited as men's.
So would it be a mistake, do you think? I mean, even though it is completely not relevant to a huge proportion of the population, would it be a mistake for them just to try and dilute it? Or?
I think it's just, when you look at the new titles are telling, because they actually have more of a defined tone of voice and actually go, as you say, for like a more narrow audience. And so I think there will be, for a while, like an audience for those magazines, but it is shrinking. It's shrinking. And the ones that we're seeing that are appearing are ones that either have a very specific point of view or have a much more multifaceted idea of what women are interested in. So they're including politics, and they're including think pieces and business, like how to write a business plan and stuff like that, which is much more in sync with more macro level trends that we're seeing with women.